Project planning with the Gantt chart. Let's open up a new project or an existing project and have a look at the Gantt chart. So I can open up the Gantt chart from the project menu. And in here, I actually already have my Gantt chart. And I have some start dates and end dates. And the start dates and end dates are simply dates on the task saying when should that task start and when should it end. In this case, this task should start on the 7th and end on the 14th. I can make changes directly by clicking the date and selecting a new date, or I can drag them in here, whatever you find most comfortable. You can also relate the tasks, and the default setup is that relations are not enforced, meaning if I make a relation between the customer meeting and the proposal, there is no enforcement that is actually the proposal starts after the customer meeting has ended. So if I want that feature, and most cases you would want that feature, you need to open up your setup. And there's some setups we should address here. The first one is project setup, and there you have some settings. And let me go back into project setup. And we have a setting down here under the budget part where we say enforce dependencies in Gantt. This one, in most cases, you would like to enable. That's an important step. That means that when we get back into our Gantt chart, it will start enforcing relations here. So if I now move my customer meeting, it will also move the proposal. And so I can start connecting things up. And as I move one thing, the next thing moves, etc. And that could be one way or the other. Of course, if I move the proposal, that doesn't drag along the customer meeting. This is general Gantt chart planning. There's nothing special. Also be aware that you can actually make relations on the high level tasks. So you don't want to do detailed planning on the lower level tasks. You can do them on these roll up tasks as well. With this planning, I can now visualize what that means when I come to resource planning. And this is where it really ties in, because I now have dates for customer meeting and proposal and analysis. And if I'm going to do resource planning, I would probably use either the resource board or the resource planner. If I open up the resource planner for my software project, we will see that there are some areas here that are marked as red or slightly red. And that means that this is outside of the timeline that we defined in the Gantt chart. So for the customer meeting, this is inside, but for this, it is outside. If I switch to a month view, it becomes a bit more clear that here we have a block of what is the expected dates for the customer meeting to take place. And as I move along, we can see now I have a block of time here for the proposal. It doesn't preclude me to plan resources outside of that window. But if I do, then of course, I'm outside of my planning as I did it in my Gantt chart. So this is supposed to be a help for planning purposes. You can do something similar in the resource board. If I'm planning in here, I can of course plan for a task. Most of the cases you would import a budget, of course, and you would have a starting point. But let me create just a work assignment in here for our software project, and for customer meeting, I'll plan for 8 hours of work for Cassie in here. And here, as I create this, I can now see that the planned date for this task is to be between the 7th and the 15th. And with putting this on the 8th, I'm definitely within those parameters. So this is all good. And this shows up nicely. But what happens if I now move this out to a point further out in the future? So I move it out here. I don't see any difference here, but now this is planned too late. If I was to open this up, I can see that now this is showing as red because it's planned to start on the 18th, but we said that we should end this task no later than the 15th. Is there any way I can make this more visible? Yes. I can work with the coloring rules. And I'll create a standard coloring rule in here. And I will set this up to make special colors if something is late or if it is early. And my colors would be that if it is late, then I want it to be scarlet. And if it is too early, it might be this egg color, yellow. But what are the conditions? Well, something being late means that the end date is after the task ends. So that would be my condition here. Something early would be that the start date of something is before the task starts. So start before task start. If that is true, then we are early. And so these are my rules. Late, the end is before the task ends, or early, the start is before the task starts. With this, I should now get some coloring, and we can see that this turns red because it's too late. If I move it here, then it turns yellow because it's too late. If I move it in between, it turns green because it is in the right window. And so this also, again, shows up in my resource planner, which is the per project planning. Watching this in here, we should see that, yes, this is green because it is within the window. If we look at a longer timeline, we can see that this is where the end is. So what we saw in the resource planner is I moved it before this date or I moved it after this date. But we visualize it because we only look at it on one project, so we can color code this. I can also go back to my Gantt chart and see where my resources are now planned. And looking at this, we can see for the customer meeting, this is the timeline we set aside for it. And I have this orange bar saying I have work assignments from the 9th to the 10th. That also shows up in here. So it all connects. You can do your planning in the Gantt chart, you can visualize it in the resource planner or the resource board, and you can see what that means when you get back to the Gantt chart. There is one small thing I want to mention, and that is if you are working with budgets and the Gantt chart, there is an option to connect the budget to the planning we do in here. The way you would do that is with a setting, again in project setup, where you can set it to move the budgets with task. And so the option we currently have is same number of days. What that means is if I move my task in the Gantt chart or on the task card, that actually works the same way. If I were to move my meeting here one day ahead, then it would also move the budget I've set aside for customer meetings one day ahead. Now, one day doesn't make a change, but if you're making big changes, that could automatically move your budget. That can be very powerful. It can also have unforeseen consequences that people think that they are just changing the high-level plan, and in reality, they're changing the budget without knowing it. And especially as you can also enforce that changes to your budget drive changes in your resource planning, you could have a chain effect of moving the planning in the Gantt chart would move the budget entries, moving the budget entries would move the resource planning. So the resource planning would in effect move along with the planning in the Gantt chart. I wouldn't generally recommend it. I think it is giving too much power to the system. I personally prefer a bit of control over how you budget and how you plan, but you can enable that if you want to. Back in here, if I open up a Gantt chart for a project, I'll select my demo 1 project. We will see the Gantt chart. The Gantt chart has actually changed a little bit in the way it looks. We've changed the graphics slightly to be a bit more of a modern experience. The new thing is that there's a lot of new columns out here with additional information. So things like budgeted cost, actual cost, percent completed, budget versus actual, etc. So you can use this more as a project plan. And drill down, of course, works on these fields as well. So you can click on them and you can get to a list of the entries that are behind, just like you're used to with flow fields in Business Central. There is also now a Save as PDF option. So you can use this to get a PDF. You can decide the size of paper and the orientation. For small projects, I like this fit to 1 page wide option. So you don't get something that is huge, but if you have a huge project, you might want it to span multiple pages. And so from this, you get a PDF that you can then share with another team or your customers, etc.